It's officially the fantasy football playoffs, which means everything we knew about players, throw it out the window, man. Everything resets. It's pretty much a new season, and we need to look at only the last couple weeks because pre-draft rankings, draft rankings, ADPs, all that stuff doesn't matter, man. Let's talk about some of my favorite starts of the week for week 15. Congratulations if you're in the playoffs. I'm in the toilet bowl in some of my most important leagues, so I'm gonna be living through you guys, man. Hopefully you guys can bring home some fantasy football championships. I want to try to help you do that. We're gonna do quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers in this video. I got a couple quarterbacks for you guys at the top. You can already see the name. It's JJ McCarthy, guys. Let's talk about him quickly in this video. Playing against the Dallas Cowboys in week 15. Now, for this video, I want to look at like the last 4 weeks of data because, you know, it doesn't really matter what teams are doing early in the season before their bye weeks. The last 4 weeks is a good little measurement where it's a big enough sample size where we can see how defense is performing. So that's what I chose to do. I also had a glance at 2 week, but nevertheless, so for the Cowboys specifically, they are 32nd against QBs on the season, 31st the last 2 weeks, and 30th the last 4 weeks. So they're essentially bottom 3 or bottom 2 all season, right? Both short term, recently, acutely, as well as chronically over the season, which makes JJ McCarthy a pretty decent start, man. We have a nice over-under in this game, and at the end of the day, the Vikings have a good defense, and JJ McCarthy has a lot to prove, dude. Look, this is a team that really wants to see what they have in McCarthy. There was a couple plays where they were like down at the goal line, and they ended up doing play action, and he passed the ball for touchdowns. They want to see what they have in him. They want to get him enabled. They want to encourage him. I think he has a chance to throw a couple more touchdowns in this one, maybe even another like 3 touchdown game. Hopefully some more yardage, right? He's been like sub 170 yards the last 3 weeks that he's started. He's just having a brutal season, man. At the end of the day, they let go of Sam Darnold. They let go of Daniel Jones. Both those guys have been studs. And I think JJ McCarthy with a really good matchup, he's going to have to show up again. Both teams are kind of out of the hunt. The Dallas Cowboys still have, I think, a little bit of a path to get into the playoffs, but it's very unlikely. I think both teams are playing for pride. I think JJ McCarthy's actually a really good start. Next up, we got Brock Purdy, guys. They're playing against the Titans. Now, typically the Titans are a team where you'd expect teams to just be able to run on them, right? Like you'd expect teams to just beat up on them. They're like the punching bag of the NFL. And they're 32nd in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks the last 2 weeks. And the last 4 weeks, they're 29th. So they're absolutely bleeding points to quarterbacks. They're actually pretty decent against running backs, man. You'd expect teams to run the ball a lot on them, but they're 8th best against running backs the last 4 weeks. I mean, Shedeur Sanders just had 30 fantasy points against them. Judkins, in that game, 14 for 26, 14 carries for 26 yards. Now, to be fair, teams essentially just stuffed the box against the Browns, and I think that's why Sanders was able to be pretty effective, right? Teams just really want to stop the run. But the Titans are actually pretty good at stopping the run in general. You know, the last 4 weeks, they're 8th best. So I think Brock Purdy in this one is going to be forced to throw against the Titans, and they're going to win the game, right? They're like 13.5-point favorites, I believe, in this game. So I think the 49ers are going to be able to score a lot of points, put a lot of points on the board. So Brock Purdy is somebody that I really like, right? I really like him as like a top 10 play in this one. So if you're kind of on the border and you don't know who to start this guy over, maybe you're deciding between a couple of like top 12 plays, make sure you guys join the Discord. Let me know in the Discord if you have a sit start question, or just let me know down here in the comments. Discord's the best way to get an answer. You get an answer from not just me, but from other people as well. So let me know. I have a little bonus one here. It's going to be Marcus Mariota starting. He's playing against the Giants, who are just absolutely dog shit, man. They're 27th worst against fantasy quarterbacks the last 4 weeks. And on the season, they're not much better, right? So Marcus Mariota has a pretty decent little floor. So Marcus Mariota is actually a decent fantasy start whenever he does start. He has a nice little floor. He went 10 for 55 in week 13 against Denver. Dude, against Denver, he had 24 fantasy points, which is kind of crazy, right? The Denver Broncos usually stop every quarterback or every offense. So I think in a really good matchup against the Giants, I do think Mariota is actually a really high-end play. I think he's like a top 12 play, to be honest. So again, let me know if you have some, if you're debating between Mariota and like Caleb Williams, maybe Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, some of these kind of borderline players. Let me know down in the comments, or let me know in the Discord if you want a direct answer. Now we move along to running backs, guys. Let's talk about Travis Etienne, who has a smash start in week 15. He's been great most of the season, man. He had like one down game in week 13 against the Titans. Other than that, over 14 fantasy points every game. He had 20 in the last game against Indianapolis. We kind of called this one out in the live stream. We said Travis Etienne is like a must start. And I think he's like a top 5 play probably this week, man. They're playing against the Jets. The Jets are 32nd against fantasy running backs, man, in terms of points allowed the last 4 weeks. And the Jaguars are 13.5-point favorites in this one. This is another game where I think Travis Etienne is just going to absolutely dominate. Bashal Tutin, he's just having a weird season, man. He's not getting enough touches. He gets some goal line, but so does Etienne. So I do think the Jaguars just dominate in this game against the Jets. The Jets are the absolute worst team against fantasy running backs. Essentially, dude, if you're deciding who to start him over, maybe if you're debating between him and other players, it's Gibbs, it's Achane, and it's Etienne. essentially there's two players that start above Etienne. It's only Gibbs and Etienne. And you can make, you can debate a couple of the others. When it comes to matchups, though, Travis Etienne has a smash start and a smash matchup and a smash point differential, right? So Travis Etienne is somebody that if you have him, congratulations. I do think he's going to have like another 20 plus point performance. Chris Rodriguez next up. Now, this one is contingent on whether he plays or not, but Chris Rodriguez has been getting essentially 10 to 15 touches a game, right? He had 15 in week 11, then 11 in week 13, then 10 in week 14. All kind of tough matchups, right? Even that Miami one, they're actually a tough matchup the last couple weeks. So Denver, Minnesota, tough matchups to run on. And he still had himself, 3.7 and then 5.2 yards per carry. He had a touchdown in that Denver game. I like him in this one. He plays the Giants, similar to Mariota. They're 31st against running backs the last 4 weeks against in terms of fantasy points allowed. So just remember, guys, in week 13, Jahmyr Gibbs had 50 fantasy points against the fucking Giants. So Chris Rodriguez, he's no Gibbs, but the Giants might make him look like Gibbs a couple times. This dude is actually a pretty good running back, so he just has to actually play. He's questionable at the moment. Now, if he doesn't play and it's Shakory Krosky-Merritt, he becomes a smash start. So I just want to preface that. And a couple guys I would personally start Rodriguez over if he plays, of course, Tyrone Tracy in the same game because he has Devin Singletary to contend with. DeAndre Swift, I'd start Chris Rodriguez over him. I'd start him over Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton. So those are just like four names kind of around each other in the same rankings. And I'd personally start Chris Rodriguez over all of them. I know that sounds crazy in the fantasy playoffs. You usually want to go through studs, right? If you have Genty, you probably want to start Genty. But just when it comes to matchups, dude, in the fantasy playoffs, it can be the difference between moving on, where you stick with the stud. Now it can bite you in the ass, right? But like, for example, last season, I was starting guys like Chuba Hubbard over some of my studs that I drafted, and he got me like 30 fantasy points in the fantasy playoffs. So it can happen the other way around. Don't get me wrong. Well, let's move along now. We got Woodland Marks. Look, I might have a Woody after week 15 because this man gets to play the 30th ranked against fantasy running backs Cardinals defense in week 15. He's coming off a game where he had 29 touches, guys, 29 opportunities. He went 26 for 68. He hasn't been great on a yards per touch basis. I will say that. He only has like 3 games in the last like 10 where he was over 4 yards per carry, right? So that's just the problem with the Texans offensive line. He's not the best gap runner or between the tackles runner. So I just want to say Woody Marks, he's getting touches, he's getting volume. He's just not that great with it, right? He got a receiving touchdown last game that really kind of saved him. Otherwise, he would have only had like 7 or 8 fantasy points. So that's kind of the risk with Woody. So many touches, not enough fantasy points to come with it, right? He's getting, on 30 touches to only have 14.6 fantasy points is not great. But the Cardinals defense, they're 30th against fantasy running back. So, the Texans 9.5 point favorites. It's a low over under. It could be a grindy game where they're really just running the ball with a nice, comfortable lead. The Cardinals doing just enough to keep the game interesting. I do think they're a serviceable enough offense that they can keep the Texans in the game. And it's not just like trash time or garbage time rather. So a couple guys I'd personally start Woodland Marks over. I know it sounds crazy. Again, some of these names, but Quinshon Judkins, I'm sorry. I'd start Woody. I'd start Woody over Javonte Williams, which is, I know, another crazy one, but just when it comes to matchups, man, so many fucking touches in a really good matchup, right? And they're favorites. I'd start him over RJ Harvey, Ashton Genty, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker III. Again, we can go back and forth. Let me know down in the comments if you disagree with any of those, but I would personally start Woody over all those names I just listed. So let me know down in the comments if you guys want to debate or if you need specific help on any of those names that are listed. We move it along now to Devin Neal. Look, I had this guy a couple weeks ago on my like sneaky league winner video, and it's kind of panning out pretty nice for me. He had 15 fantasy points in the last game. He gets 20 total touches, 19 for 70 and a touchdown. Only 1 catch for 14 yards. I kind of wish he'd get more receiving work. That week 12 game kind of faked us out there where he had 7 targets, 5 for 43. So he's really taken a step back as a receiver. But, 15 fantasy points on 20 touches, that's pretty decent. That is, what is that, a 0.75 fantasy points per touch or so. Last week against the Bucks. Now, the Bucks run defense is not the same. It's not as good as it used to be. Bijan just kind of shred them last night. But in this game against the Panthers, look, I had him as a sneaky league winner because of the schedule. And the Panthers were one of those teams that we had circled, right? They are 29th against fantasy running backs the last 4 weeks. And the Saints can essentially play spoiler to them, right, too. So they're not necessarily playing for nothing. I do think the Saints kind of want to lose out so that they get a better draft pick. But against the Panthers, they know they can play spoiler. They know they can ruin their playoff chances, maybe make it a little bit more interesting interesting for the Bucks and Panthers going down the stretch. They're going to play each other, I believe, twice. So just to put a cherry on top of it, the Panthers are only a 2.5 point favorites in this game. It's a low over under. It's 40.5 at the moment as of recording this. So I think Devin Neal's going to be called upon yet again to just be their guy, man. He's going to get another 20 touches, I believe. Alvin Kamara is out again for this game. So I like Devin Neal. It's a great matchup. He has most of the work, right? 20 touches is somebody that we have to essentially start in our fantasy football lineups. But who do we start him over, right? Who's going to get the boot on our team? Let's talk about a couple guys that I would personally start him over. We got Devin Neal versus Carolina or Omarion Hampton versus Kansas City. Keep in mind, Omarion Hampton is coming off a game where he only had, I believe, 30% of the snaps. Kamani Vidal is very much involved. He gets a receiving touchdown to save him. Very tough matchup against Kansas City. I'd start Neal. I know it sucks because, we've been waiting for Hampton to come back, but I'd start Neal. And this is a tough one, guys. We got Devin Neal against Carolina or in the same game, Rico Dowdle against the Saints. So both teams are pretty much like bottom 15 against the run. So when it comes to matchups, it's a good matchup for both players. But let's keep in mind that Rico Dowdle was just overshadowed by Chuba Hubbard in the last game. Chuba Hubbard had, I believe, like 17 or 18 fantasy points. Looked great. He was very much involved. The team said they're going to play the hot hand approach with both of those guys. So you got Rico Dowdle, who was a stud kind of in the middle of the season, kind of faded away the last, 2, 3, 4 weeks, right? And then we got, Devin Neal, who's kind of ascending. So that's one of those perfect examples of really tough sit starts. Go with the guy who was good but faded, or the guy who has only been good once, right? One game in the last 4 weeks that he's had opportunities. So I'd personally go Neal with that one over Rico Dowdle. I know that can bite us in the ass there, but it's a little sketchy with Chuba Hubbard having that big game. Here's another one. We got Neal, obviously, against Carolina, or Kenneth Walker III against Indy, with Indy essentially not having a quarterback. I know they got 44-year-old Phillip Rivers now in the house, but this is going to be a team that's going to really be struggling to move the ball, I think. So this could be a game where Kenneth Walker dominates the Colts, right? We just saw the Colts get absolutely shredded by Travis Etienne. To be fair, Etienne didn't really have to compete with Bashal Tootin in that game. Tootin didn't really get many touches. So Kenneth Walker splitting with Charbonnet or Devin Neal against Carolina in a really good matchup. So that's another tough one there. I think I probably lean Devin Neal in that one, guys. Kenneth Walker III. And Kenneth Walker, man, it looks like he has a contract incentive or a clause where it's like, if he has more than 3 touchdowns on the season, he loses money or something, dude. It just looks insane. Every time they get into the red zone, they're like, all right, Kenneth Walker, get the fuck out of the game, buddy. Go hit the bench. Like, this is Charbonnet's time, which sucks, man. If you had Kenneth Walker, it could have been a really good season. So I'd go Devin Neal over there. Again, let me know down in the comments if you have specific questions. All right, let's talk about wide receivers. We got Jefferson and Addison playing against the Cowboys. We had J.J. McCarthy as a quarterback start. And similarly, the wide receivers do really well against the Cowboys. They're 29th worst against wide receivers the last 4 weeks. And we have a nice over-under here. It's 48.5. So I want to start both Addison and Jefferson. If J.J. McCarthy and quarterbacks perform so well against the Cowboys and so do wide receivers, that's the formula, right? A high over-under. They're a bad secondary. They can't stop quarterbacks, wide receivers. So we got to start both wide receivers against the Cowboys, man. It's just how things are. The Cowboys are 5.5 point favorites. That's like perfect. That means the Vikings are, let's hope, forced to throw the ball a lot. The Cowboys run defense, 17th best against running backs the last 4 weeks. That's a huge improvement. Let's keep in mind that early in the season, before they made their trade for Quinnen Williams from the Jets, they were like bottom 5 right against the run. So 17th best is a huge improvement. It's a nice over-under. Cowboys are bad against wide receivers and quarterbacks. I want to start both Jefferson and Addison. Here are a couple names that I'd start Jefferson over. I'd start him over Ted McMillan, Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf. I know that might sound crazy after what DK Metcalf just did. The fact that some of these other guys getting way more looks, especially considering the fact that Jefferson is coming off of 6 weeks in a row. What is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row, less than 9 fantasy points. And, but even before that, it wasn't that much better, right? 13, 10, and 10. So I know it sounds crazy saying to start him over DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, Olave, Ted McMillan. It's just the matchup, guys. I'm looking at the matchup. I know the talent. JJ McCarthy's kind of playing for his career at the moment, so that's what I would do. And Addison is another one where the dude is also pretty involved, man. 10 and 7 targets the last couple of weeks. I'd start him over Khalil Shakir, Pittman, Sutton, Worthy, DJ Moore, Alec Pierce, those guys, those like wide receiver 3-4 type of guys. I just think he has a lot more upside, especially to get in the end zone. And this can be a game that's really back and forth. I think both Addison and Jefferson just get right. I think I can see both guys having close to 100 receiving yards, maybe even both of them having a touchdown. We'll see how involved. The tight ends were just so involved last week. It was crazy. Like every tight end was scoring touchdowns. We got another duo here, guys. We got Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel. They're playing against the New York Giants, who are the 28th worst against fantasy wide receivers the last 4 weeks. 46.5 over under. We love to see it. We have two bad defenses squaring off in a game that really means nothing, right? They're both out of the playoffs. Jayden Daniels isn't even starting, right? But we are going to see a little bit of Jackson Dart in this one. So should be an exciting game. You know, Mariota versus Dart, both bad defenses. I think both offenses could show up in this one. And the reason I have both of them, but I want to say I do think Deebo Samuel is a little bit of a better start in this one. And let me just tell you guys why. There's a report. It's the man versus zone coverage report on PFF. You guys can go check it out. I think it's an open article that you can read where you can see kind of how players perform against man and zone defense. And then you see who they're playing this week and how much of those coverage schemes they play, right? So for example, this week, the Giants, they play the 6th most man coverage, right? And I wanted to look at which dude was better. Deebo had 0.57 fantasy points per route run against man coverage, while Terry has 0.3. Right, so he's almost double Terry McLaurin's fantasy points per route run against man. And in comparison, or just to give you some context, Terry McLaurin has 0.47 against zone. So Deebo's the better guy against man coverage, but they're both playing against a bad defense, right? So I think both guys could get home, but I have a slight lean toward Deebo Samuel. I do think he's a really sneaky play. I think it's tough to like rest your fantasy season on guys like Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, who, you know, they don't have their starting quarterback. They're playing in a kind of meaningless game, and it's a divisional game. So I do like Deebo this week. I think they're both like top 30 plays. Deebo, I got like as a top 18 play over guys like Sutton, Ladd McConkey, Diggs, while Terry McLaurin is more of like a top 24 guy, if that gives you any type of context. So let's move this along, guys. We got one more name on this one. It is Jauan Jennings. He's quietly been a really good fantasy player, man. He came back in week 6. Had a little bit of a slow start, 3 weeks of really slow production. It was like a Christian McCaffrey was just dominating in those weeks, right? But then from week 9 to now, he has 4 games out of 5 with more than, 11 fantasy points, almost 12 fantasy points or higher. So he's been actually really great, man. And the San Francisco 49ers get to play the Titans this week, who, like we talked about earlier, they are really bad against wide receivers and quarterbacks, right? They're actually really good against running backs. They're 8th best the last 4 weeks against running backs. So if you want to beat the Titans, which you probably can beat them and you probably will beat them, you got to do it with your wide receivers, with your quarterbacks. Again, so Shedeur Sanders just had 30 fantasy points. Jerry Jeudy, for fuck's sakes, had 15 fantasy points against the Titans. So the Titans kind of are a get right team. You know, as much as I love large dick Rick Pearsall, he's useless. Right, him and Matthew Golden might as well fucking chill at home, play some Call of Duty, play some World of Warcraft. You guys are not part of the offenses, it seems, and it seems like the teams don't really have any plans to get them more involved. Now, I will say this: there's been a bye week, right? We had a week 14 bye, so San Francisco coming out of the bye week. Maybe Pearsall's more involved, but 2, 4, and 3 targets the last 3 games for Pearsall since coming back from injury. I think he's just not right. And I don't know if the bye week is enough time for him to get right. It's 3 combined fantasy points in those games. He was leading the NFL in receiving yards the first 3 weeks. So it looks like Jauan Jennings is just going to be the alpha guy rest of the season, at least for now. Let's see if Pearsall, I do think there's going to be a little bit of a ramp up for Pearsall. He's not just going to randomly have 20 fantasy points this week. Anything is possible. As soon as I just said that, and as soon as I hit publish on this video, it's probably going to happen. But I expect Jennings to just continue his role of being the alpha on this offense. They're going to have to score points. They're going to have to throw the ball. Brock Purdy is someone that I really love this week, which means somebody on this team is going to have to do something. It could be Kittle, could be Jennings. Shit, it could even be CMC as a receiver, but I put my eggs in the Jennings basket. I hope. All right, that does it, man. My starts of the week, dude. It is the fantasy playoffs. Good luck. Hopefully you guys are starting some of these guys. Hopefully they perform for you guys. If you guys need dedicated advice, make sure you guys join the Discord or, just down in the YouTube comments. Like the video if you like it. Subscribe if you want to catch more of this stuff. Thank you guys for an awesome season. It's tempering down. We're going to be doing like 1 or 2 videos a week. Just the important stuff like waivers, maybe sit starts, maybe players to avoid and stuff like that. We'll be doing the live stream on Sunday. So we're going to keep doing that until the end of the season, just to help you guys with sit starts, whoever is still in the playoffs. I'll live through you guys vicariously. So again, thank you guys for sticking around. Thank you for being here, and I'll catch you guys on Sunday, or maybe tomorrow we'll do another video. We'll see. All right, peace.